Hey Darsh,
Hi, Seema.
today we're going to talk about judgment.
Woohoo!
So let's start off with, what is judgment to you?
Oh, it's okay. So if you'd have caught me on this one a few years ago, it would have been a very emotive topic indeed. Now it's more reflective. So judgment for me is what's happening in the world with the crisis that we have, where we're pointing out the differences and using those differences to manipulate and harm each other. But it's not just in this current circumstance, it's like a cultural belief system that is actually a cultural belief system no matter what color you are, what race you are, where you come from. That's how I feel about judgment. And it's not just the big stuff that's happening. I think it's all the small stuff that happens into our day-to-day lives as well that forms judgment. And I guess if you were objective around most of the topics in life, judgment wouldn't be such a big thing.
That's interesting. So in relation to that, how has judgment affected you personally?
It's coloured my life in many different shades. And I'd say, I look at myself 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago. I was black and white, man. I was like, look at your face. I would have had you classified. You were okay to talk to, you're not okay to talk to. Oh, because you had this look, you were that kind of person. And it was very a limiting belief system. And it coloured my life because I kind of feel, and this is why it was so emotive, I feel growing up there was a lot of judgment. I grew up in the UK, and we landed in the UK in the 1970s from Africa, where I was born.
Mm.
And I'm sort of second generation African born, Pommy Aussie.
Wow.
So there was a lot of judgment in all of those layers, I guess. And growing up in the UK when it was very racist, so there was judgment on colour, but culturally we had a lot of judgment within our community as well.
Mm.
And I grew up at a time when it was still, girls were not allowed to do this, they were not allowed to do that, they were not allowed to be seen in this way, they were not allowed to wear things. So there was this constant kind of dialogue almost that you would come across, in life around these different things that were day-to-day things, but it was like this constant judgment, this heavy book would be laid on your head. And it was pretty full on. It wasn't I don't feel it was a nice way of growing up in that sense.
So do you find that it affected you personally in a detrimental way that then carried on to sort of how you went about your life?
Yes and no. I think when you're in it, you're blind to it, so you don't know that it's having a detrimental effect on your life. And I guess in a way that's what I thought life was. So I didn't question it. But having explored life from different angles, it's kind of like, yeah, that was a limiting thing, man. That kind of, I used to wonder how many people I'd kind of cut off because I had judged them, either for their look or, who they were or what they had done or blah, blah, blah. And it was really interesting because I love connecting with so many different layers of people. I don't care what culture they come from or what, that really, none of that stuff bothers me. It's that individual when you connect with them, they've got so many stories to share. And I kind of wonder, and I'm like, wow, how many people did I chop off the board? Because, you don't, because you're in that blinkered way, you're not necessarily always inviting the people that you resonate with into your life. Ironic, isn't it? So for me, it's like fascinating now watching what I did and going, wow, that's kind of bizarre how we create this thing called judgment. We live by it, but it's not necessarily comfortable. And it definitely isn't fair.
So was there a stage in your life where you noticed that this was something you wanted to overcome?
Yeah, I think it was when I started having more dialogue with different people. And I have to say, thank you, God, I am so blessed. I always grew up in multicultural societies. I always grew up in multicultural places. And so it was kind of unavoidable meeting people from different paths and different ways and different attitudes. So as I was growing up, and I think my fascination with humanity was always there in a different way, I would inevitably you get into conversations. But that expanded more the more I sort of moved away and started exploring myself, I guess, in a way. And it definitely was an eye-opener when I kind of left the suburban town that I grew up in and went and lived in London. And it was just like my whole world exploded. And everybody and everything was in London, and it was all of a sudden the doors were open and I was not restricted. So I could talk to anybody. And then because I started venturing into the work that I do, or did as a holistic practitioner, it was kind of totally unavoidable because you just didn't know who the hell was going to turn up on your doorstep.
Let's talk about what you learned when you went into that holistic field of work, because it sounds like that really triggered the awakening of many things, as basically any spiritual awakening does. But it's really interesting, specifically on this topic of judgment. How do you think discovering this new way of life or entering that new place of work, what did you learn when it came to releasing judgment, the judgment you had towards others, and just sort of how that actually helped you in your journey with judgment?
Massive. Huge. So I think my journey started before I became a practitioner. Personally, I feel my journey actually started when I was introduced to yoga. And the very first class I was introduced to, I kind of fell in love with yoga, but I was one of those on-off people. But that was like, it was weird because yoga was all about me and I was having to dive into myself. But then I'd already started diving in and exploring other people, having to work with different working with people that I would probably not have encountered where I was living, because suburbia is very different to a city in a sense because it's very insular. Not to say that there aren't, people who think outside of the box in suburbia, but for me at the point where I was, meeting those kind of people wasn't a norm, whereas this became the norm. And then as I graduated into becoming a practitioner, and of all the things on the planet, the universe crossed my path with something called Mexica Pakli, which comes from Mexico. So it was very interesting because it was so alien to anything that I'd ever done or experienced in my whole life. And that was such a huge awakening. And one of the most beautiful, beautiful, beautiful principles, because it's a way of life, it's a philosophy. Like yoga is a philosophy, it's a way of life. It wasn't just you learned it, you got on your mat and then you forget all about it. One of the beautiful things we were taught was never to judge anybody. because you were there to help. You're a healer. You were there to help them through their pain body, to help them shift whatever it was. And the moment you had judgment, you weren't going to be able to help them. And I've got goosebumps talking about it. And it was, I wouldn't say any one of us probably understood it straight away. But I think it's something that you learn over the years as you work with people. And as you work with people and they come in and they have stories, like you have stories, and often their story is your reflection of what's going on in your life.
That's interesting.
So, you think you're there and you've got all these qualifications or, this experience, and you're kind of slapped in the face a lot because you're kind of humbled because you realize that what's triggering them is also triggering you.
See, I like that. Okay, what's triggering them is triggering you.
Yeah.
So could you please elaborate a bit more on that? Because I think that's something a lot of people would love to know more about.
Sure.
That's a great line. What's triggering them is triggering you, and I guess what's triggering you is triggering them. So, yeah.
This is a vast topic. It's huge, but in a nutshell, generally, people are drawn to you for a reason. It's kind of interesting because what would happen is they would be telling their story and it will be about their father or their mother or their sister or their boyfriend or whatever. And there'll be a part of me that's going, oh my God, this sounds so familiar, and that is what I mean by triggering them is triggering you, because when it would impact me and I'd be sitting there working on them and I wouldn't go in my story because it's about them, it's their time. It was kind of like this thing got parked. But there was this, oh God, I just got triggered by what they said. And oh God, I actually acknowledge and resonate with what they're saying because I'm feeling it. That's what I mean. It was like a mirror thing. It's a two-way mirror. And I don't believe as a practitioner you can ever think that you're above the person who's coming to see you. Just because you have, 20, 30, 40, 50 years worth of work done. Our work is never done, As humans, we're always going to go through these iterations of finding our truth, I guess, whatever that feels like.
You meet new people all the time, and even people that you already know, you'll have these experiences of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So do you mind sharing a couple of tools that can be used? This is for people that want to really move into a place of non-judgment and just leading a life of attempting it. Because let's face it, we're all human and it's always going to happen. And it's more about being aware and just acknowledging when it's happening and then wanting to do something about it, because you can't not judge. You can try, but the universe has a way of purposefully bringing circumstances, people, situations into your life that then make you go, how do I want to respond to this, right? So it'd be great, because you're someone that does have decades of experience in the holistic field, and what's just a couple of tools that everyone can take away?
I think the biggest tool you said, and it was interesting when you said to me this was the topic, and I was like, it's huge. And I think the biggest sort of set of tools are, as you said, we're all human. And what we've got to remember is it's like an auto response when we go into judgment, because it's a trained response. It's one that we've had since we were born, because it was around us all the time. We do. She said that, he said this, they did that. Oh, look at the car that they've got. Oh, but they could have done this. Or, so that kind of dialogue is around you 24/7 pretty much. And it's on the TV, it's on the news, it's in movies, it's everywhere. It's in our newspapers. So we're in, when we go into that first sort of judgment, we're kind of in our auto response, I call it. It's a memory recall. And one of the things that will help the most when you're trying to step away from that platform of being in constant judgment, I guess, is to realize, A, that you're doing it. The biggest thing that we always have to overcome is acknowledgement. Yeah, acknowledge that I need help. Acknowledge that I did this. Acknowledge that I just thought that.
Mm-hmm.
So 1, acknowledge. 2, sit back. Sit back from it, and sit back and maybe feel how it makes you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make you feel? What does it make you feel? Because your feelings around that judgment are very, very, very insightful into why you think that way.
Mm.
And a lot of the times, the more you drill down, the more you realize that sometimes you're thinking that way because everybody around you was thinking the same. And it wasn't really you. You don't really feel that. Other times you're thinking that way because you have a lack.
Mm.
And there's something within you that you're feeling insecure about or emotional about. There's an emotive response, so to speak. And that's the thing you need to explore. Other times, there's a difference between seeing the lay of the land and what's coming up and making a judgment. How far do I need to kick the ball? That's kind of okay to do, right? But when we start to get it into a personal field of, they are like this, we are like that, we need to understand that a lot of those auto responses are coming from a place, and we need to kind of find a route to it. Obviously, we could be digging for the whole of our lives.
Mm.
So at some point on certain things, you kind of just need to be able to drop it. And you have to kind of train yourself to keep dropping it over and over again. And the only other thing I can think of is have a sense of humor. It helps because the minute you start to self-flagellate, you're in judgment.
So, say you've done these excellent exercises, what would you say from your experience is the benefit of making time in our lives to actually acknowledge it, which we've just spoken about, acknowledging it, sit with it, see whether it's something that's lacking in yourself or whether it's probably a subconscious reaction to something, etc. What would you say are the benefits of actually taking the time to do this? Because I find that a lot of people may go seeking for ways to overcome, but it's really nice when you also know what kind of benefits come from the work, because at the end of the day, all of this is work, and it's not paid work. It's paid in peace, that's for sure, but it is self-work, it is inner work, and I just find it can be helpful for, someone like yourself who's been practicing what you preach, so to speak. What benefits have you found?
I think it's funny when you say it's not paid work. It is paid work. Its payment is not the money or the gold that we will handle. It's actually our ability to be able to live with each other comfortably. And even if we don't resonate with each other and each other's opinions, we're not going to be doing the same sort of shit that we're doing right now, right? And this is, if you look into the world, due to judgment, look where we're at. We're at this crisis point almost. We've been here so many times. And I think cultures are melting and melding. And so the work is inner peace. There is no value you can put on inner peace. So if you're looking for reasons why you need to do the work, often we spend a lot of times in our head thinking about this, that, and the other, but often those things that we are thinking about, worrying about, is judgment. It's coming from a place of feeling judged, or it's judging something or someone. So in essence, our mind is in this constant flux over stuff, past, present, and future. And I speak from a point of view of a person who I would classify was a very judgmental person, who had a lot of judgment in her without realizing. And so, having done the work, I can honestly, hand on heart, say that I'm in such much more of a peaceful place, much more of a contented place. And my viewpoint of relationships that created a lot of turmoil has changed because I've actually taken the judgment off them. And so the energy is not so static anymore. And by taking that judgment away, I'm less inclined to be agitated by them because I'm looking at it from a different angle, different way. And it's not about always finding an excuse for other people's behavior, but it's understanding why would they behave that way. And when you start to do that, there's less judgment because you're going, oh, they did this because, or, you know, blah, 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 that we put on. Whereas when you're going, I wonder why they did that, I wonder what makes them do that, you start to, it's an inquiring mind, so it's a freer mind. It's more expansive. And feel into this, you know, just think about somebody that you've got a judgment around, or, you know, you've got an opinion around. And do you feel like you can get beyond that? And then if you step back and ask that same question, but ask it as a question, why would they do that? How do you feel? All of a sudden there's a different feeling within you. So the payment is endless. It's beyond words sometimes because it changes your life, your personal inner being life. It changes your relationships. It changes how you operate in the world. It changes what you see in the world. It's just change, but in a better way, a more expansive way.
Well, that sounds very good to me.
It's worth it.
I would say there are a lot of people that would love that. That would absolutely just enjoy the freedoms that come from looking into judgment and understanding its position in their own lives and in relation to other people and in relation to larger topics as well. Before we actually started this podcast, you said to me, I wish I'd learnt about discernment instead of judgment. I think it was something, please correct me, but can you just repeat what you said and maybe tell me what you meant?
I was hoovering, thinking about this topic, and it came to me that I wish I'd been taught discernment instead of judgment. And what I mean by that is discernment is a lot freer, and it's a lot more accepting, and it's a lot more forgiving.
Wait a second. Sorry, what is discernment?
Discernment, actually, I always said, you know, when I learnt the word, it was like my saviour. And I always said if I was going to have a tattoo, it was going to have discernment written all over it. And discernment basically says, I see you where you're at. And therefore, I know how to hold a relationship with you where you're at, rather than my expectation of where you should be, my judgment of where you should be. And this allows us to have some very interesting ways of relating to people because it knows how far we need to go with a person, how far we can go with a person. And we take off the rose-tinted glasses and we do reality checks. And judgment says that's the way they are, end of story, this is the only way you can approach this relationship. Whereas discernment doesn't say that. Discernment says I can change as you change. And I can move away anytime, or I can step in anytime, or I know where these boundaries go. And it starts with you. Whereas judgment just bangs into a brick wall and bang, ouch, I've hurt my head again and again and again. So for me, hey people, can we teach our children discernment rather than judgment? Because discernment also teaches, or has taught me, people behave in ways due to life experiences. And if I don't know their story, if I don't know what kind of life experience they've had, who am I to judge? Because how do I feel when I'm judged on my life experience and my story when they don't really know about me? And that was just a big wake-up call. Whereas discernment says, I understand there's a story somewhere, and maybe I don't need to know all of it. Maybe I don't care, But if we're going to do an interaction, I know how far I want to take it, whilst respecting you and not putting you in a little plastic bag and labeling you and hanging you up to be dried and withered there forever and ever. Amen.
I mean, honestly, that sounds pretty good. Discernment.
Learn it, people. It's in the dictionary. Discernment.
I mean, I'm going to have to go away and learn discernment.
Discernment's great because it weeds out our relationships. It's a real weeding process. But I think the most powerful thing in the weeding process of discernment rather than judgment is in discernment there's a lot of forgiveness. And there's a lot of letting go a lot easier than there is through judgment. And I would say, if we're going to put anything on judgment, it's a very weighty, meaty, heavy, dense thing. It sort of sits on your shoulders and you round up. And it comes to mind that often we have judgment in our, infrastructure through the courts of law and justice, and through policing, through medicine, through teaching. There's a lot of judgment in our environment, and it's a lot of the times it's weighty and heavy and horrible. So it's kind of like we need to understand that judgment. How do you break it down? How do you make it? And you can't use judgment because it's such a huge vortex of energy attached to it. So maybe that's why we need to move towards discernment, because it's less used and it's a lot lighter. And judgment, where are we judging from? It's the question I always have to ask myself. Why did I think that? Why did I feel that? And it's always been, usually in the back, there's been an emotive trigger. Discernment just says, this is where we're at, this is where I'm at.
How does one discover what their emotive trigger is?
Ooh. Remember I said there was lifelong work? That's the one. It is basically, it's the same journey of going on the journey of learning not to judge. And I don't know how you can compartmentalize these things. We're doing it because we want to kind of explain a bit more, right? But in essence, all of this is kind of intertwined. It's a weave in our life. And as you do undo one thread, you'll find a lot of other threads have to come undone. So that whole thing about emotive triggers, there is work to do. It comes in many different forms, but it means willingness to go on a journey with yourself.
Journey, everyone's favorite word.
Yeah, we're all in lockdown. We can't go anywhere. And the journey has been inner. And it's amazing how many people find that really uncomfortable, right? It was distressing for a lot of people to sit at home and be with the people around them that they're usually kind of in and out of their lives. I mean, I'm talking about even intimate partners here, where, people's buttons got pushed because they were spending so much time together. And this was a great place for discernment, but it was also a great place to start doing your emotive trigger stuff, because this is the best time ever on the planet to be doing that work, because the more we diffuse our emotive triggers, the less we create outside.
Yeah. So I'm just absorbing everything you're saying, and I'm excited to go away from this and learn about discernment. I feel like that's a really good takeaway. I just think taking the time to, one, contemplate topics like judgment and discernment and how it affects you in your life and how it affects others and how it affects the people that you're surrounded by and the people that you surround, and understanding your part in other people's judgment and triggers, I personally think is huge. It's not always just about realizing someone else's making you feel judgmental, but understanding that you make other people feel judgmental. So it's really a two-way street. And I just think exploring topics like this and talking about alternative ways to really just understand, you know, to understand what it means, and to understand how much more blissful your life becomes when you take the time to learn about these things, when you take the time to do the inner work, to listen to podcasts like these and go, oh, wait, yeah, maybe I'll look at things a bit more differently. I mean, for me, the main point is to create a life that is more peaceful.
Yeah.
That's really the main crux of it. Is why bother learning about judgment? Because it actually makes your life better. That's what it is for me. Do you have any words to sort of add to what it means for you to talk about or even to teach in this field?
I think for me it's a sharing of knowledge and wisdom. You know, I call it pushed by the universe. In some ways, I went into all of this blindly, you know, and what I've come out with at the end, it's not mine. It's globally ours. And as somebody who's had the absolute amazing life of being able to cross over different cultures, be like half and half growing up culture, you know, having to reform a state of some identity which didn't label one or the other, and then, you know, having practices that are coming from different ways in different cultures, it's been an eye-opener. So for me, this is a platform, an arena to kind of open my own eyes as well, because I'm always learning, but to hopefully help people to say, hey, there are different ways. And it's beautiful when you start exploring. It sort of accidentally happened to me, and it can accidentally happen to you. But if you go with it, it's incredible. And life is amazing. We are truly blessed to be on this planet that has everything we need. And how about we just accept it and live it? So that's where it is for me. And these topics are very charged, and we need to be able to frame it in a different point of view to the one that we get repetitively over a lot of media references, you know, and then we've got to realize at the end of the day that we all are very unique in how we translate information and knowledge, and that's when we come into more acceptance, because I'm unique in the way I see things, but then I'm also not so unique because we resonate on the way we see things. So it's about being able to accept all parts of us, therefore we can accept all parts of others.
That is beautiful. And I think we'll wrap it up there. So
awesome.
yeah, so I mean, it's been great to chat with you on this topic.
It's been fun.
Thank you, Darshna. Yeah, we'll see you next time. To all of those that are listening, we'll just continue this lovely
We'll be back.
unfolding journey of life. So thank you very much for listening, everybody.
Yay, thank you guys, and we'll see you again soon.